Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us today for our session with Dr. Robin Bright. Before we get started, I would just like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. The treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Wasanic people on whose traditional territory I live, work, learn, and work. The Wasanic people have lived and worked on this land since time immemorial. And I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, or this afternoon, as I said earlier, depending on where you are in this fine country of ours. Depending on how the camera is positioned us, I'm either above her or below her on the screen. I'm not sure which one, but it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robin Bright, teacher, researcher, literacy leader, and award-winning author. For those of you not coming from the fine city of Lethbridge and where she works as a professor of education at the University of Lethbridge. She, I think, took a path that a lot of education academics take, and that is starting as an elementary teacher, and then that curiosity bug got her, around children's development as readers and writers, and that kind of brought her into a life of researching language and literacy in school and home settings. And I can see how that could be, I guess, a rabbit hole if you wanted to make it, Robin, in terms of so many areas to go. It's I noticed in one of your slides you referenced Marianne Wolfe, and so I immediately ran for my Reader Come Home book, right? It's all marked up. You'll be really proud of me. All the right literacy strategies are there. Great book. So I can see how that can be a passion to study. She also, while she's somehow finding time to teach in there, undergraduate and graduate students in the areas of early childhood, elementary, middle education, reading, writing, and children and young adult literature. Her previous book, From Your Child's Teacher, won the Parents Guide Award. And tonight, I know that the university was talking about this being a book launch, and I think they made a mistake on the webpage, because this has to be the virtual book launch, because there's nothing better than getting everyone together and celebrating all the hard work that you've put into to this, and all the hours you probably sat in that room and blocked yourself off from the world. So this is your virtual launch, but I'm really hoping that the university, as well as we, all find a time to all get together and celebrate all the hard work that you've been doing to put this together. So, Robin, it's great to have you here this evening, and it's great to have all the people here in the middle of the summer. It's a testament to your fan club that's building out there. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to you, and looking forward to our session. We'll have some time at the end for questions if anyone brings anything into the chat.
Great. Thank you, Lionel, so much for that introduction. And thank you, Mary Machusi and Pembroke Publishers, for this opportunity really to introduce my new book, Sometimes Reading is Hard. And we'll get into the subtitle in just a few minutes. But it's just a pleasure to be here for this webinar. I appreciate you taking the time to fill out the poll at the beginning there. I just think it's important to get a sense of who we are before we get started, and I just checked it, and I can see that really people are representing a wide variety of grade levels and teaching experiences, and thank you so much for indicating where you're listening from as well in the chat. That's just wonderful to be able to see. Well, so you and I are here because we care about reading. We care about teaching reading and helping our students, at all grade levels, develop the reading skills that they need to become capable readers, so that they can read what they want and what they need. But we also want them to learn to appreciate what reading does for them, and that love of reading. So yes, we have to do it all. And I'm very excited to share the image on the cover of this new book because, well, haven't we all seen that look on someone in our classrooms? Right? There are moments in each one of our experiences as teachers where we feel on top of the world and, things are going great, but we also know what it's like to lie awake in bed and think about that one or two or three students whose needs we just don't feel like we're meeting. And that's why the book is called Sometimes Reading is Hard. The subtitle, Using Decoding, Vocabulary, and Comprehension Strategies to Inspire Fluent, Passionate, Lifelong Readers, was chosen purposefully because we have to balance what Nancy Fry calls the skill of reading with the will to read. And that's really what I've tried to do in this particular book. And let me just let you in on why I wrote this book. And let me just read what the slide says. This is what I wrote in the book. Over and over in writing this book, I was drawn to Marianne Wolf's illuminating phrase that we are all involved in teaching what she calls the story and the science of reading. Teaching reading well to all students must address the science and what I'm going to be referring to as the reading components. But crucially, it should never neglect the story, the aspect of reading that connects us, makes us feel, and makes us want to read. And that's really the reason for writing the book. And I hope it will inspire you to want to read it as well. But, let me tell you just a little bit about how I came to write this particular book. So you already know I was a classroom teacher for 10 years, 5 of those years at the grade 1 level, and then, of course, pursued master's degrees and PhD degrees to just learn more, because it just was so fascinating to me how children learn language. But really, a few years ago, a good friend and principal approached me. Now, he'd been an elementary principal, moved to a middle school. So as an elementary principal, he was really familiar with, how children develop as readers and supporting his teachers in that way. When he moved to the middle school, he asked his teachers, "What do you need from me?" And unequivocally, they said, hands down, "We need to focus on reading." So, like all teachers in middle school, your students are funny, creative, smart, great sense of humor. And that was true in this school. But what the principal said is, my teachers are saying they're being held back. They are not able to achieve what they're capable of achieving because of poor reading skills. And so would I help? And that really led to, a 5-6 year partnership in which we really focused on how to support readers. Now, this was in middle school. And I think elementary teachers, get a lot of this kind of professional development. Sometimes it lands right in the faculty lounge, right? But middle school and high school teachers don't often get it. And so after working with this school for so many years and really seeing such success, not only in reading scores, but also in, we were able to get a Reading for the Love of It, huge grant. And we're able to, help every teacher build a classroom library. And what's really interesting is before we started, I'm not even sure all those teachers thought they needed a classroom library. But as soon as we started to talk about how reading develops and how everyone has a role to play, it soon became apparent that, a classroom library, might not be a bad thing. So just to give you a bit of background about, why I thought that this book was so important. All right, let's take just a minute, if you don't mind, to get a sense of what you're thinking about when you think of reading. Could you go into the chat room there? Some of you have already been there, so just ask you to type in any words, phrases, questions, anything that pops into your mind when I ask you to think about reading and teaching reading. So I'd really like to see if what people put there. I'll certainly add my own phrases as well. Okay, comfort, enjoyment, what else? Comprehension, yeah. Adventure, oh, yes. Equity, patience, oh, I love that. Phonics, passion, a different experience for every child. Fluency, adventures, playful, yes, joyful. Multi-literacy pedagogies. Imagination, insights, yes. Oh, David Bouchard, yay. Skill, will, thrill. Oh, okay. All right. Well, and continue. I'm going to make sure that I get a chance to have all of this recorded. So what we've done here, I think, is just kind of filled in, the K column under a KWL chart. And I see myself in your responses. So the good news is that we, and I mean teachers, administrators, educational assistants, researchers, we know a great deal about teaching reading, right? So what I want to say to you is, whether you're a new teacher and you're just looking for places to start, or you're mid-career and looking for new ideas or ways to re-energize your practice, or you're a confident, experienced teacher, who stays awake at night thinking about that one student. That's really what this book is about. It's about meeting those needs. So let's jump in. All right, the first thing I'd like to do is just share the general organization of the book and let you know the decisions that went into this particular format. So I want us to feel like we're setting out on a pathway together. And so that is really what I wanted to capture in the introduction. It's like, walking, with a trusted friend into a number of classrooms, seeing what teachers are doing, hearing what researchers are telling us. And so that's really the idea of setting off down the path together. Chapter 1 is entitled, "What do you mean I have to teach reading?" Because you may not have asked that question, but I certainly did. And I remember being really surprised, being, in the middle of a group of grade 1 students, just thinking, what do you have to do? How are you going to do this? So chapter 1 is really about setting out the principles behind teaching reading, what I really believe we all need to know if we're going to support our own students as readers. And then you'll notice chapters 2 through 5 focus on what I'm referring to as the components of reading: decoding, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and that will take us to a place, on our journey, where we then have to think about how are we going to sustain what we've set up here. And of course, always, where do we go next? And that's the final chapter. So that kind of gives you an overview of the content. And I want to let you know that I was inspired to set the book up in this way by the words of P. David Pearson. And he said, and I'm going to just divide decoding here for you into phonemic awareness and phonics. But he said, phonemic awareness is important if it's on the pathway to phonics knowledge. Phonics knowledge is important if it's on the pathway to fluency. Fluency is important if it's on the pathway to vocabulary. Vocabulary is important if it's on the path to comprehension. And comprehension is important if it takes us on a pathway to critical thinking and action in the world. So, these components matter. And the more we can read about them and find new strategies to teach them, the better opportunity we have to meet all of our students' needs. So let's set off down the path. I wanted to share these two images with you because, the baby shows us how quickly, we set off down this path on becoming readers, right? And then the puzzle and the outline in particular helps us recognize how important it is to set a foundation for learning how to read. And that's really what decoding is all about. It's setting that foundation so that then fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension can follow. All right. So learning to read is hard, but learning to teach reading is hard too. Let's take each of those separately. Why is learning to read hard? Well, it's because it's not a natural process for human beings in the same way that learning to speak is, right? So Marianne Wolf says it's a fundamental mistake to assume that reading is natural to human beings and it will simply emerge as whole cloth like language when the child is ready. So knowing that, we have to do something in order to teach children how to read. Okay, so the second part of that is, learning to teach reading is hard because it involves balance between teaching the reading skills, which we'll talk a little bit about today, and I'm calling those the cognitive factors in teaching reading, with the motivation factors. So when we can bring together the cognitive factors where, our students are learning the skills that they need, and those, the skills that they need become more and more complex as they go through the grades, with the motivation factors that are so important and have become more important in the last decade. When those things come together, it's like magic. And I'm saying it's where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So let's see how that might look in the classroom. I came up with this visual representation, and we're going to read it actually from the top down to show how all of these things come together, how the cognitive and the motivational factors come together so that we can reach the goal. The goal being, creating those capable, fluent, passionate, lifelong readers. That's what we're headed for. And I think every teacher, it doesn't matter if you teach kindergarten or grade 3 or grade 9 or grade 12 or university, that's the goal, right? So how do we get there? Well, I think that the goal is informed by engagement, and research bears that out. When students are fully immersed in their reading, and you know what that looks like in your classroom, you can feel it. Sometimes it's referred to as flow, right? And it's really when students are so engaged that, it's even hard to interrupt them, right? So engagement matters so we can get to that goal. So how do we create that engagement? Well, we make a lot of good sound instructional decisions, and we use good, sound instructional practices, right? And, some of those you read about, you read research. Some of them, you talk to your neighbor and you see what they're doing. And some of them you just say, no, this has always worked for me, right? So those instructional practices are also informed by the resources you use, the way you set your classroom up, your own teaching philosophy, all comes to play there. So how do you choose those good, sound instructional practices? Well, it's your knowledge. You're informed by your knowledge of how reading takes place, the cognitive factors of phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, and fluency. Those are the cognitive factors. But you're also influenced by by what you see in your classroom, by what you know works. And the motivational factors that I've pulled out of the literature include confidence, interest, choice, dedication, and collaboration. So this visual representation, I hope, shows, why our knowledge as teachers is so important. Without that solid background of, how reading takes place, I think it's impossible for us to get to the goal, because we're swayed by too many things. Oh, here's a cool idea, but until we can connect that cool idea back to cognitive or motivational factors, it's really hard to know if that's going to work for our particular students. So I hope this is as important to you as it has been to me in writing this book. Okay, this is just really a quick review. I wanted to focus on the 4 components of reading. This is really the knowledge that each of us brings into the classroom. What do we know about decoding? What do we know about fluency, vocabulary development, and comprehension? Because the more we know, the more we can support students in helping them develop as readers. Now, you might notice that I've used the term decoding, even though, and I know there's a lot of maybe grade 1 and kindergarten and primary teachers out there, you're going to say decoding means developing phonemic awareness and phonics, and it does, right? But what I find is when I use the terms phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge, I find teachers above grade 3 sometimes think, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with me. But we still decode all the way through the grades, right? And so it's a more, I think, inclusive term. But certainly, I recognize how important phonemic awareness and phonics are in beginning reading, but I think they're important throughout the grades. And it's, for some reason, we like the word decoding or even the phrase word identification more as our students get older. But fluency is an important component of teaching reading, vocabulary development, and comprehension. And each of these areas, is supported by a huge body of research literature and teachers' experiences. So just to give you a bit of background, the components of reading, or using that term, the components of reading, really came into vogue around the year 2000, and that's when the National Reading Panel came out with a report on best practices in teaching reading. And they did that based on having looked at over 100,000 reading studies. The earliest was around 1965, all the way up to 2000. And their work, really helped us articulate what the components of reading are. Now, motivational factors, are just as important, because if a child won't read, how on earth will you develop their skills in reading? So I've been really excited about the motivational research that's come out in the last maybe decade or so. And it's really in thanks to researchers like John Guthrie, the previous International Literacy Association president, Linda Gambrell, but also to teachers, teachers, like Donna Lynn Miller and Pernille Rip and Mr. Shu. They have helped us recognize how important motivation is to teaching the skills of reading. So the factors of motivation that I really explore in this book are confidence. Kids know when they know how to read something, and it builds confidence. Interest. They also know when they're reading about things they like to read. Choice, right? Choice has become really an important part of reading programs in ways that it certainly wasn't important when I was teaching. Dedication. I just love that dedication is something that we can work on with kids and help them recognize that dedication is something you can develop as a reader. And there's lots of books that feature, students who struggle as readers, and we can share those with our students. And of course, collaboration, right? We can do more together as readers than we might be able to do independently. So what I'm saying, I think, throughout the book and in each chapter, regardless of which component I'm focusing on, we also need to think about developing the motivational factors that will help you develop, for instance, phonemic awareness, that will help you develop your phonics knowledge, that will help you develop fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So that's the balance that I'm talking about throughout the book. Okay, let's head forward then. What I'd like to do in the next, I think it'll take about 10 or 15 minutes here, is to share some sample strategies with you that you can try from the book. And I pulled them from the chapter on fluency and the chapter on vocabulary. And I think what I'd like to say is when you walk with me through the book, I'm going to share with you a lot of teachers' stories, a lot of their experiences. The research is there as well, but I want you to be able to feel like, you're standing in a classroom and you're watching what's going on. So you'll find resources, teaching tips, step-by-step lesson ideas, and so that's what I'm going to share with you today is 2 of the step-by-step lesson ideas from 2 different chapters, one on fluency and one on vocabulary. All right, let's get started. So the first teaching strategy that I'd like to share with you, and I know some of you will be familiar with this one, is Storybinds. Storybinds are important because they help to develop oral and reading fluency. And each of those supports one another. So as students develop their oral fluency, it helps them with their reading fluency and vice versa. When they develop their reading fluency, it helps with their oral fluency. So what you're seeing there are 4 of my student teachers. They're all practicing teachers now, and they're holding up 4 books. So right away, you can see choice is a part of this particular teaching strategy. They all have their own books. So you have their Koala Lou, the Balloon Tree, oh well, everybody knows Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type, and Lost and Found. Now, besides holding up the books, you can see each of them has a story vine that they've created so that they can retell the story that they've read out loud, as in a shared reading kind of environment to their students. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about the Storybind so that when we go into the step-by-step, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a long braid, and the braid can be made out of bunches of wool or really anything that can be braided. Marlene McKay, who's a good friend of mine, and she helped me explain the Storybind to my students. She uses old bed sheets, rips them up, and uses them to braid with. And then, of course, what you do is you create small artifacts that will help you fluently retell the story after you've shared it in a reading environment. So that's what you're looking at there. And now let's jump into the step-by-step and see how you might use this in a classroom. All right. And I want to start off by saying one of my student teachers was just in her internship last semester in a kindergarten class, and she made this kind of a 2-week mini unit in her class, and it just was amazing. She said that the vocabulary that students developed and started to use fluently in reading and in speaking was amazing. So I do know that it works. Okay, the first thing you want to do is choose a book that you love. And you know which books you like to share year after year with your students. It might be, Chrysanthemum, The Important Book. It really doesn't matter. My 2 favorites that I like to use to demonstrate this strategy are Don't Fidget a Feather. I don't know if anybody knows that one, by Erica Silverman, and Perfect Man by Troy Wilson. And I did bring that one, and I know it'll be a little bit hard to show you, but here's my Storybind for Perfect Man. And this is the main character, Michael McCallum, in the story. And of course, he wants to be a superhero, his favorite superhero, who is Perfect Man. But it is a work of fiction, right? So, but once you've chosen the book, you'll create your own Storybind, and you'll gather those small toy-like artifacts. And what you do, of course, is you want to represent parts of the story and attach them to the braid, almost like charms, I guess. And then that allows you to retell the story. Okay, so you've done that work, and then you read your story out loud to your students, and you want to use that, as I know only teachers can do, that beautiful, fluent, expressive language where you pause at certain vocabulary, and you even let students jump in when they want to finish a sentence, and you want to read that story in a way where it really captures your students' interest, right? So remember, interest is an important motivational factor. And then the next day, or maybe, if you do that before recess, after recess, you'll want to tell the students, this time I want to retell the story. And I'm going to use something called a Storybind to do that, right? And this, again, you're using the same, enthusiasm and expression, and you retell the story to your students using the Storybind, and you'd hold it up just like, I did, or my students would do, and to guide you in retelling the story, right? Now, the students might notice, right? The retelling is not exactly the same as the read aloud, and that's great, right? But they might also say, oh, but you always repeated that, love you forever stanza, right? And you did it fluently when you read the story, and you also did it fluently when you told the story. So it's great that you really encourage them to see some of the differences, but also some of the similarities between reading the story and retelling the story with the Storybind. All right, and then, this will take, a little bit of time and scaffolding, but eventually your students will find the stories that they want to read and then use for their Storybinds. Now, depending on the age of your students, they'll choose different different stories. I know the intern teacher that I know who did this just recently, she really encouraged them to use storybooks that she'd read to them out loud, and so they knew the format of the story. Things like The Gingerbread Man, that would work really well. Three Billy Goats Gruff, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But, when students are a little bit older, I think you can encourage them to use maybe slightly more complex stories, but always, within reason. Like, you don't want them to become frustrated or choose a story that's really going to be too challenging in that respect. And then, you can take them through the braid making process for the stories. This works really well if you're working with young children with a book buddy. And so if you can bring together two age groups, that way, they're all really interacting and using language in authentic, interesting, fun kinds of ways. But, I think kids can do this on their own as well. I've certainly seen that happen. And then, of course, you really just want to set aside time for students to practice retelling their stories using the Storybind, but also sharing the book, also showing that this is a story that they found and that they loved, so and that they wanted to retell it. Once you give them opportunities to practice, and you can, provide different opportunities by just switching pairs around if you want, or small groups of children, visiting other classrooms works well. And then, of course, families, right? You want to make sure somehow they are able to share this in a larger setting if they want to, and if they're comfortable doing so. But the more opportunities they have to share their Storybinds with others, the more their confidence grows as language users. And it's that confidence, right, that we really want to build on as our students are developing as readers. So that's an example of a step-by-step teaching idea from the chapter on fluency, and recognizing, of course, that oral fluency in turn supports reading fluency. And those of you, and there's many who work with English language learners or students with specific learning challenges, you're always looking for ways to support them as language users, but without it being, the spotlight being on them, or, feeling singled out. And so the Storybind, and especially, if you have, I think, kids even working in pairs on them, gives kids opportunities to build that confidence that they need. So I have time for one more. So let's have a look. Oh, sorry, before we do that, I just want to make sure I share with you a couple of ideas about how the Storybind can be adapted to different teaching contexts. So I've definitely had student teachers who've taken this out into the schools and used it in other, in high school. I had a student teacher who used this in social studies, and it was used more as a timeline. So the braid then, became, this is what happened, which led to, this next event and this event and so on. I've also seen it used with Shakespeare in a high school class. And so what I would want to say is, think, in terms of whatever your context is, and how the Storybind possibly could be adapted for your students and their needs. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you will know about Word Sneak. I love this idea, and this appears in the vocabulary chapter of the book. And Word Sneak, some of you might watch Jimmy Fallon, and this is not unlike one of the games that he plays with his guests. But Word Sneak is really about supporting students in learning new vocabulary, but in using it as well. One of the things that I've found in my own experience being in classrooms is that often students are exposed to a lot of new vocabulary, and especially as they go up the grades and in different disciplines, it could be physical education, band, the fine arts. I mean, it doesn't have to be English language arts, social studies, and science. But being exposed to vocabulary doesn't necessarily make it our own, right? I mean, I only use the vocabulary I know well and I'm really comfortable with, and I've used it before, and I've, practiced it. And if I have, kind of a word on the periphery of my usage, I might not use that in a social setting because I don't own it. I'm not confident. And so you want to be able to use strategies with kids that help them not just to be exposed to vocabulary and kind of, well, I know what that means in context. You want them to be able to say, I know that word. It's my word. I use that word, right? So Word Sneak is just great fun. And so here's a step-by-step for how you might use this strategy. Students would work in pairs to play this game, but I'll show you how you might adapt this and use it in other ways as well. But if they're working as partners, what they would do is, and this right now I'm gearing it for, let's say, an elementary class, or maybe a middle school if there's a word wall. And so what the partners do is they take turns choosing maybe 5 or 6 words from the word wall. And so if I'm your partner, you're going to go up to the word wall and I'm going to turn away so that I can't see which words you're choosing. And you take 5 or 6 words off, and maybe they're all, I don't know, Halloween words, right? Or maybe they're all words related to rocks and minerals. But it doesn't matter. You can choose any words you want. That person comes back and they put them face down so nobody can see them. And then the other partner, they go up to the word wall. This person is supposed to turn away so that they can't see what's going on. Now, each student has a pile of word cards in front of them. So student 1 picks up the card. They don't show the other student what it is, but they can see the word there, and they just begin talking. They're just having a conversation. Hey, Phil, how are you doing today? And then they try to sneak the word into the conversation, right? Make it their own. And when they get it in there, they get to put the word down. And then now let's go on, take it step by step. And then student 2 picks up their word card from their pile. Now they have to keep the conversation going, right? And what is so great about this is, of course, young kids, they don't necessarily try to trick each other. But as students get older, they do. And it can work really well with just partners playing it. But it works really, really well with an audience. If you get 2 students who, are not too shy, they'll come up and they might do it in front of the rest of the students. They might sometimes ask you, would you pick our cards for us, right? And so you can have a lot of fun that way. But of course, they really have to improvise if they don't know which words are coming up. So this is just a great game that I think, our kids like, but teachers can play it as well. And of course, what is it doing? It's helping students build that library of words that they have to have if they're going to continue to develop as readers. So that gives you, I hope, just a little glimpse of some of what you'll find in the book. All right, and the last chapter I've called Sustaining the Journey, How to Inspire Your Students to Love Reading, because this is so important. How many of us lost our love of reading at some point and had to get it back again, right? And my students tell me this all the time. They can say, oh, grade 4, that was the year. I just, stopped. I read voraciously up to that point, and then no more. And that's just so unfortunate. And it's just because I think, we're sometimes challenged to continue to balance cognitive factors with motivational factors. So this chapter is really about finding the ways to continue to motivate students in our classrooms. So you'll find ideas there about how to build and maintain a classroom library, how to make sure you're still excited about your classroom library. It'll talk about heading out into the community and visiting public libraries with students so that they see what resources are there and available to them after they leave our classrooms. So I wanted to kind of finish on that note, that, I wanted to make sure I instilled motivation throughout the chapters, but that there was one chapter at the end devoted to what we know is so important, and that's motivation. And the timing is just right. I just really want to take this time to thank you and find out if you have comments or questions that you'd like to bring forward in the chat room.
Thanks, Robin. That was great. It was. I really enjoyed that, and I think, there goes Adam right off the bat. Fantastic, and I think you took the words right out of my mouth. Sometimes folks are sort of ruminating for a few minutes, so maybe I've got a couple thoughts that I wouldn't mind passing by you and sort of get kind of what you were thinking when you either wrote or said that. And the first one is actually something you put in the chat. And you wrote when you asked us to put something in there, and many did. And I think I could look at all those words that folks in the group put in there, go, yeah, I get that. But you wrote reading is comfort. Why was that?
Well, in the last year, we've really talked a lot about anxiety and, just being challenged to know where our lives are going. And I was asked, what would I offer to people who are extremely anxious at this particular time? And I said reading. I said, reading is a place to be outside of yourself, and whether or not and I read a lot of disturbing mysteries, I will tell you, that's my genre, and so in a way it's not comfortable, but it is. I just feel so relaxed. That's as soon as I know that I don't have anything else to do in a day, I am heading for that book, because it will take me to a place where I am comfortable, and comfort can be anything. It can be fiction, nonfiction, a picture book, a chapter book, a play, a graphic novel. I think everybody will find what's most comfortable to them.
So and I have to ask this question, I don't know if it's my parent brain or my teacher brain or what brain I'm asking this question as, but and I totally agree with what you said there. How do you balance that against all the digital pressures and all the different entertainment, all the kind of that short term, give it to me and I get my little endorphin hit and I move on to the next thing. And they lose, I think you lose the comfort that you're talking about with that a little bit.
Well, what you're talking about is what motivates people, and those that that ding, right, or good job, those are the kinds of things I think that technology does really well in keeping people engaged. But I know it maybe you don't see it yet, but honestly, that game Word Sneak is every bit as engaging as a light coming on and saying you made it to the next level. but that's really our challenge as teachers, is balancing the cognitive and the motivational aspects of what we do when we teach reading. And I don't have all of the answers, and there's a lot of gifted teachers out there I know who are doing incredible things when it comes to that. But it only takes one book to get that reader into reading. I've seen it so many times in my pre-service teaching classes, and they'll say, "Robin, I haven't read a book since grade 6," and I'll be like, "That's okay. That's where you're starting, right?"
Yeah.
And it takes time, but if you just keep at it, you eventually find that one book that makes a difference to that reader.
Yeah. And having 3 boys, and my middle one being the reluctant reader, and 2 grandmas, both grade 1 teachers. Yeah, I mean, he had every book available to him, right? And his other 2 brothers just ate him up. But it took a long time and a lot of patience to. So I have that down as one of my notes there. You sort of 2 words that sort of seemed to percolate through the presentation. One was time, making sure you leave time for those things, and then the other is balance.
Yes.
I think, I don't know if it's the big bridge and Lethbridge, it's got to stay balanced, that is there, that's driving all that, but that seems to be the key. I mean, everything you talk about is there's a balance. Nothing is done in isolation. Is that kind of a fair observation, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, when you have kids who really, some do gravitate towards books, as you say, but not everyone does. But there's also ways to kind of, and I know kindergarten and grade 1 teachers are brilliant at this. They find ways to put the writing materials into the building center, and they'd like, would you like to draw up your plan for that? And I saw a wonderful lesson, and I can't remember which teacher it was, but she had her students build small little Lego houses. And then, and they all just, they went to town with it, right? And it was just a fabulous lesson. And then she said, would you write out the instructions for making your house, and then give your instructions and the Lego pieces all broken up to the next group?
Yeah.
And I just thought, such a sneaky way of helping see the value of reading and writing in a variety of contexts.
Well, I think I mentioned you, and some folks on that have been here before know the little dirty secret here is that I'm a senior physics teacher, learning along with everything. And I mean, we use that to get kids to write out procedures. Exactly that, right? And that Lego one. So it's neat to see the passing back and forth of the ideas as well. I'm just to give you a second just to quickly scan the chat if you'd like. There are a couple people there. The word sneak is coming through. Monica and Myrna both talked about it, and even as a school staff icebreaker, I thought, geez, that's a pretty good deal there. So while you're quickly looking at those, I will mention to folks, if you are interested in the new book coming out, Pembroke would like to thank you for coming in today. And on your screen right now is an offer. And if you remember that code SRH, is sometimes reading hard, is 21. When you click on the little pink button there, or you go to pembrokepublishers.com, you'll be able to find Robin's book. Even though it's not out yet, it's you can pre-order it, top right-hand corner, click on there. And when you check out, please feel free to use the code for a $5 discount on there. So just a little thank you for joining us, though I think the real thank you comes from the comments that I'm just going to echo here, Robin, of keeping it real and a great presentation and connecting all sorts of different things in the classroom related to reading. So I'd like to sort of close us off by letting you sort of finish off and take us out tonight. But on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for taking the time. And it's been an enjoyable hour. And if you can do that in the middle of July, you can do that anytime. That's for sure. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll finish off with, this is the way I thought I would start this webinar, but I'm glad I didn't, and this is how I'd like to finish it. It has been concerning to me that we are maybe moving towards polarization in reading once again. And for those of you old enough to remember the reading wars, and I certainly am, I believe that if we just keep our focus on the students we teach, we can avoid the negativity of debating method. And that's what I'd like to end on.
That's great. So thank you very much again. And thanks to everyone. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.